This is breaking news.
Time now, 8:11. We're breaking into regular programming right now to bring you an update on what is happening in downtown Huntsville. What started out as a peaceful protest about 3 hours ago has quickly devolved into chaos as police try to clear the streets.
And you can take a live look at the picture now. We have learned that protesters are standing off with police, and at one point that police deployed tear gas into the crowd. WAAY 31's Will Robinson Smith is live right now. Will, what are you experiencing? Just set the scene for us.
Yeah, that's right. Protesters are being actively cleared out with a combination of tear gas and law enforcement marching down the streets, telling people this protest is over, they need to go home. In fact, myself and photographer Brittany Collins felt the tear gas. We were standing in line at the end of this street here at the intersection of Fountain Circle and West, where Jefferson turns into the west side of the courthouse. At that intersection, we saw law enforcement lob one of their tear gas canisters onto Fountain Circle to try to move protesters back toward this part of the street, towards where it turns into Jefferson. And then at one point, Huntsville police launched a canister toward the crowd. One of the protesters actually kicked it back at Huntsville police. It was repelled by Huntsville police, and that's when more tear gas started coming out. We were caught in the middle of that as they were trying to move protesters down this street and toward Jefferson, back behind where a photographer is standing right now. They're, at this point in time, believe they're still making a slow march down Jefferson Street right now, trying to clear protesters. And in fact, you can see a little bit, you can see those fireworks right there. Believe that is part of the tear gas that law enforcement is using to move protesters, again, trying to get this protest to end and get people to go home at this point in time. We've heard some potential reports that rubber bullets were used. We cannot confirm that at this point in time. We're still working to learn more from law enforcement, exactly what tactics were used here tonight to clear, as Dan and Naja, you mentioned, what started off as a peaceful protest, and then protesters refused to leave and things had to escalate, unfortunately, from what started off as a conversation, a message, a moment to talk about where we need to go forward as a community here in Huntsville and Madison County. Of course, we're going to continue to follow the very latest on these developments for you throughout the night, both on air and online at WAAYTV.com. For now, reporting live in downtown Huntsville, Will Robinson Smith, WAAY 31 News.
Hey, Will, before we let you go, we were watching this scene play out with about several hundred other people on Facebook Live, and we heard a series of explosions, pow, 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 pow. It's apparently coming from the police. Now, were those the tear gas canisters, or were they using other kinds of weapons?
From what we could tell, those were tear gas canisters. Those were launched both by, from what we could see, the Madison County Sheriff's Office, who is standing on the south side of the courthouse. They used those on the south side there, as well as Huntsville police as they worked to advance this way. We saw a number of canisters that came, and it sounded like a really large firecracker going off. You saw the thing land in the road. Sometime it came with some sparks on it, and then you saw a big bam, pop explosion, and that's when the gas started flying. And if you haven't experienced tear gas, I hope you haven't. It immediately starts to burn your eyes. You feel it in your throat. I know we felt it on our skin. Fortunately, there was some water by the benches. Right now, though, if you're just joining us, we're at the intersection of Jefferson and Spring Road right now. At this point where we are, there are no protesters. They have all been pushed back away from the courthouse square where this standoff happened and where those tear gas canisters started to be fired. Dan, Naja?
And Will, this was peaceful for so long. Was there a particular instance that led to this escalation?
From what we could tell, it didn't seem like there was any one particular thing that necessarily set, this moment off. We saw protesters at one point, they were in the middle of the intersection of Fountain Circle and the West Courthouse Square, and everyone was in the street. It was, moments of chanting various things. I can't breathe, no justice, no peace, things like that. And at some point, everyone gathered onto the sidewalks. They all cleared the streets, and there were moments of going back and forth, of going onto the sidewalk, getting back in the streets. And at a certain point, Huntsville police came on their loudspeakers and told the protesters, this is no longer a peaceful assembly, this is an unlawful gathering and you need to leave. And there were a number of times they repeated that message, protesters not taking the advice and refusing to leave. They instead stood there, and it wasn't until the tear gas started being lobbed that protesters finally started to clear out en masse.
Hey, well, Will, another question for you. I'm not sure what your perspective was or where you were when this all broke out, but were there any physical confrontations between police and protesters?
No, there was nothing physical that we saw from our vantage point. So we were standing, so if you imagine me right here, Cotton Row Restaurant, the intersection of Fountain Circle and West Courtside Square, was right behind me. Immediately to my left was the row of Huntsville police, and you saw the photos we posted on Facebook and on our website of Huntsville police in their black riot gear. They were just forming a line. Protesters were on the other side of the square, so there was never a moment of in-person physical confrontation. The only real back and forth between police and protesters that we saw of any kind of physical nature was, again, when that canister from Huntsville police was lobbed toward the protesters and the protester kicked it back, and then it was quickly deflected by Huntsville police. But we didn't see any blows being exchanged by either party. There was nothing physical like that we saw.
And Will, just in terms of your positioning, can you describe how you're staying safe? I know you said that the police were positioning you in a certain way.
Yeah, so we all, of course, had our masks on because being this type of a protest, a lot of people were cramped in together. So we were keeping ourselves safe that way. A number of protesters seemed to anticipate that something like this might happen. They came prepared with their own gas masks. That's in addition to Huntsville police with their gas masks. We kept ourselves safe by as a WAAY 31 unit, we were all, in groups watching each other's back, and, just as media colleagues, we were all watching each other, making sure we were keeping our heads on a swivel, seeing how things were developing. And, if Huntsville police asked us to move back, to change our position, we, immediately obeyed that request and tried to make sure that we were falling in line with what they needed to try to end this protest as peacefully as possible before the tear gas started flying.
Hey, Will, do us a favor, step out of the scene for just a minute so we can see what's going on behind you. And if you can, describe the size of the crowd, because we know the estimate was about 1,000 people at Big Spring Park. Many of them did move into downtown near the courthouse, but then police started asking pretty quickly for everybody to disperse. How many were left by the time they had to start lobbing tear gas canisters?
So at that point, when the tear gas started being lobbed, gosh, there were still hundreds of people by my count that were crushed into that side of the square. I mean, the street is clear now, but if you can imagine not being able to see really from say this light pole here beyond the tree, the one that's lit up, from about there to the corner and then a little bit around, there were people crunched in there, and then also on this side of the street where Big Spring Park is, on both corners there, as well as the corner with the public parking space. Still a lot of people that decided not to end the protest, even after organizers asked, could people leave peacefully. This started peacefully, as we've mentioned tonight, and there was, a plea from various organizers and community members saying, we understand there's work to do, but in order for us to keep the message on brand, we need to leave and continue this discussion another day. And the protesters, for whatever reason, decided that moment was not the moment they were going to leave, and they ended up not leaving until Huntsville Police and Madison County Sheriff's Office, and we saw some Alabama State Troopers as well, start to make their march down Jefferson Street.
All right, thank you, Will. We're going to check back with you in just a bit, but now we want to go to WAAY 31's Brecken Terry. And Brecken, we heard you on the live stream talk about being exposed to that tear gas. What's the situation where you're at, and what was that experience like?
Well, I'm actually not 100% sure if that was in fact tear gas. I know from my perspective and what my group experienced, we had actually pushed down here on Jefferson Street, actually back away from the protesters when they started firing. We did see smoke, and you could smell it in the air. It didn't smell like normal smoke, but I never had that burning sensation. Now, some other people I was with, they did though. Police had this area blocked off, so if you were a protester, you could not go down this street. So they essentially pushed the protesters this way down Jefferson Street. We saw what looked like fireworks going off, a lot of bangs and smoke and things of that nature, but everyone was pushed back in this direction. And we did hear glass breaking too, but I think you can see that right here on the ground. I believe that's what we heard as far as glass breaking. It's right there on the ground. So again, still a very heavy police presence here in downtown Huntsville, and a lot of these protesters were, saying a lot of chants. It definitely got a little bit tense, if that makes sense, because it went from everyone was chanting, and then you saw police officers put on the mask, put on the gloves, then you kind of knew something might happen here. But again, it was peaceful, relatively peaceful. And then, the police did give several warnings to protesters to get out of the streets, to get on the sidewalks. And that is kind of, as it started getting darker, that is when we saw Sydney, you saw some flashbangs, correct? Yeah, we saw a couple of flashbangs, gas. I believe Will and them were actually closer, and that he was definitely affected by that tear gas or gas. I'm not 100% sure if it is tear gas, so I want to be very careful there because police have not told us that yet. But he was definitely in a lot of pain. So was his photographer, Brittany. It's unclear if they did fire rubber bullets. I know when I was actually down here past this police cruiser, I saw something bounce, and I did run up to go grab it, but some of my other colleagues said it's not worth it. Don't go grab that right now. And when we came back up here, I couldn't find whatever it was bouncing because I wanted to see what exactly that was. So that is the situation right now. We have heard from several people that maybe some crowds are gathering in Spring Park, and we're actually about to walk down Spring Street here in a few moments and check that out and see if that is in fact true. So live here in downtown Huntsville, Breck and Terry, WAAY 31 News.
Breck, it's certainly not the way the NAACP organizers wanted to see this protest end. I have a couple of questions if you're still with us. Are you still with us, Brecken?
Oh, wait. There's still, yeah,
Okay.
I'm still here. You can actually see police officers walking up the side here right now.
Real quickly, have you seen or heard of any looting or damage to any businesses down there? And what about that Confederate statue next to the courthouse that the protesters were surrounding at one point?
Yeah, so the police actually have these barricades up right here. Those barricades were all around the Madison County Courthouse, essentially guarding the Confederate monument that is there, so protesters could not actually physically get to that monument. So that is what we saw. Actually, let's scoot over this way. Police are actually coming up here right now, so we're gonna move out of their way here real fast, guys. There. But no, I have not heard of any businesses per se being damaged or anything like that. Let me just scoot and get out of the officers' ways here real quick.
Yeah, best idea.
I do want to ask a couple of them. I do want to ask a couple of them, or get the PIO and ask him, did they fire rubber bullets, and what exactly was that smoky gas material that we saw, because Will Robinson Smith and Brittany Collins were definitely feeling the effects of that, and you can see them taking off their masks, and they're telling us to move. So we are going to move. Yep, let's go. So guys, we're going to walk down this way. You can see a lot more police are now here. There was only one car here just a few moments ago, but now I would say probably about 9 more police cars have pulled up. And yes, sir. So they told us to go over onto the sidewalk, and that is where we are going right now. I don't know if y'all can see that, but these police officers have zip ties on their uniforms.
Is there any indication why they're asking you to move?
Allowed to come down this street. No, there is no indication why they're asking us to move. I don't know why they are asking us to move. So I'll find that out here in a few moments, though.
And Brooklyn, you mentioned that you heard police warn the crowd several times to move out of the way or to disperse. But was there a particular incident that you saw that led to police unleashing the gas or whatever they unleashed into the crowd?
From my perspective, no. The only thing that I can think of is that the permit for the rally was supposed to go from 5 to 6:30. The NAACP president, Mr. Jerry Burnett, told me that. And actually on their sheet that I have that the NAACP gave us, it said that there was a march scheduled at 6:15 after everyone spoke. But then the speakers, as the rally began to wrap up, said there is no more march. There is no more march. But then the crowd marched anyways down here. And that is when, we saw all of the police around the courthouse and those barricades were up, and the protesters were chanting Black Lives Matter, don't hands up, don't shoot, and they were yelling take it down, specifically talking about that Confederate monument that protesters physically could not get to because of those barricades that police had up. And I just want to point out real quick, all of these are state troopers. Most of these cars here are all state troopers.
An impressive showing of a police force downtown.
Yeah, and like I said, guys, y'all were here with me just a few moments ago. There was only one cop car here. Now there are many, many, many more. Again, I don't know why we were asked to leave from down there, but the police came over in their riot gear and they were in like a flank formation. I don't know if you could hear that, but the sergeant said halt, and they all halted. Then they began taking off their masks and shields, and that is when they told us to move down here. So we started moving. I'm hearing something going off now. It kind of sounded like an alarm type thing. I'm not sure what that was. I don't know if you guys could hear that either. But there is a helicopter flying above head. We're at the Renaissance building, the fish mural, for anyone who is familiar with downtown Huntsville.
I got some more info from
Actually, hey guys, real quick, I'm going to hand it over to WAAY 31's Sydney Martin. She has an update and some information here. So guys, why don't y'all talk to Sydney?
Hey, so I asked Huntsville Police what was going on with the helicopter that we're seeing fly overhead. They did confirm to me that is the state troopers' helicopter. Now, you can see this whole road right here. This is Spring Street in downtown Huntsville off Jefferson Street. These are all straight state trooper cars. I asked them what's going on. They won't tell us. I can tell you when we were up there walking around with Huntsville Police, we saw City Administrator John Hamilton. Not really sure what he's doing with police. We do know that he has a military background. But again, we don't know what's going on up there.
And Sydney,
so again, these are all state troopers back here that we're seeing. We're still trying to learn more about what's going on exactly. That's a Huntsville police car that just pulled up. And really right now it's unclear what exactly is going on, but there's a very large law enforcement presence downtown.
And Sydney, we know Brecken described at one point that the crowd was chanting, take it down, take it down. At any point, did you feel like things were about to take a volatile turn?
I can tell you the organizers of the protest, Naja, that ended at 6:30, were telling the protesters to leave, to go home. And a lot of those protesters actually did go home. Nobody really got close enough to that Confederate monument to bring it down or to get volatile. I will tell you the sheriff's office had a major presence up on the steps of the courthouse, making sure that people could not get up to where it really was or to where they were. And they were ready the whole time. We saw sheriff's deputies on top of the roof of the courthouse, really just everywhere, making sure people were obeying their commands.
Sydney, if you could take us back about 40 minutes or so ago when this broke out. You were doing a great job giving us a play-by-play online, live streaming this whole event as it happened. We were watching here back in the studio just before we went on the air. But if you can, take our viewers right now back to that few minutes ago to when those first bombs, essentially, the tear gas bombs went off.
When the smoke started going off? Okay, so I talked to Huntsville Police yesterday. They said the first tactic they used after that sirens we were hearing is smoke. They deploy smoke. So we heard lots of warnings, and then all of a sudden we saw the smoke go off. And when that happened, the protesters started running towards us. We'd already backed up. So we're on Spring Street. 2 Huntsville police officers said, "Get behind us." They had tear gas mask on and everything. They said, "Get behind us right now." So we pulled behind them on the road, and we sat there and we watched police move people back. And I can just tell you the way that worked is they moved, they gave them some commands. You saw like a flashbang basically, and then all of a sudden more gas. Then we saw some officers pull out some spray it, people moved back. And essentially that's how they were moving them back. We stayed down on the street and watched it all happen, watched, I would say, dozens of police officers in gear, head-to-toe gear, gas mask, helmets, pads, everything, move people out of the way, out of the streets. Okay, so I don't know if y'all can see this. Coming down this street past the state trooper cars right now, it looks like 2 Huntsville police officers, and then that's John Hamilton. He is the city administrator. He's the mayor's right-hand man. He's walking down the street right now. He's out here. He's been out here for most of the night with law enforcement.
Is he heading your way? Can you
Daniel,
talk to
I don't
him?
know if you have any more questions for me. He is. Hey, City Administrator Hamilton, would you be willing to talk to us real quick about what's happening? Would you be willing to talk to us real quick about what's going on right now? So I guess talk about the large law enforcement presence we're seeing in downtown Huntsville right now.
So you really have multiple agencies that have responded to the event here. Obviously Huntsville Police Department, but also Madison County Sheriff, and also our partners from ALEA, the patrol. So yep, pretty significant presence, and really is focused on trying to keep the public safe. We have good folks that want to protest and demonstrate and exercise their First Amendment rights, which is their right to do under certain conditions. And so, that's really what we've been here to protect the public while folks also exercise that right.
I know we were here and we saw some of maybe the tactics Huntsville police were using to push the crowd back. Can you talk about what exactly they were using?
There's kind of multiple different things. First off, there's a lot of verbal commands letting folks know that there's a certain point in time at which it becomes an illegal assembly and that they don't have the right to continue to do and engage in the behavior that they're engaged in. So that's first, is giving those verbal commands and giving people the opportunity who don't want to be there and be breaking the law, give them the opportunity to depart peacefully. And so that went on for a good period of time, probably 30 or 40 minutes of those kind of warnings and giving the people a chance to depart. And then you begin with, they did release some smoke canisters, letting folks know that, hey, we do intend to ramp this up and you have no choice but to leave. And then ultimately it's police officers that are just engaging with the crowd. Fortunately, we didn't really see a lot of violence. There's a few things here and there, little things, a little bit of damage. There does appear to be some injuries by both law enforcement and potentially folks that were trying to get away. Sometimes you'll see in a crowd people that are trying to leave, trip, fall, and so there is the risk of a kind of a stampede effect. So you're trying to avoid that. And so really the way the police are trying to do it is with minimal pressure so that people have the chance to leave peacefully if they can. And so I think that really has happened here. It's a pretty good sized crowd. I mean, there was several hundred folks out there. And so, we went through that process, but there's still things that are ongoing. There are still folks that are here demonstrating, so the police are engaging with them and helping them find their cars and get out of town.
When we saw you walking down Jefferson Street, we also saw some fireworks going off. Can you talk about, was that the protesters putting off fireworks illegally?
So things that look like fireworks, yes. I mean, but they're sometimes when, like with the police or in some cases the sheriff had released some smoke canisters, when those things first pop open, they look a little bit like fireworks. So you might have seen that, but there also were a few examples of people in the crowd that were throwing fireworks, and unfortunately, that's a dangerous situation because they create the potential for stampede. And that just becomes dangerous for the public. We saw that early on, several hours ago. There was an altercation between 2 protesters in the middle of the crowd, and a bunch of folks started running that were around the perimeter, which does create a dangerous situation for them. I saw it. I didn't see anybody get injured in that particular example, but it does create, when you've got the crowd that's behaving that way and you start having interactions inside of the crowd that are negative, sometimes they can create a dangerous situation for the people around them. So.
What's next for these people who do not go home? Are they going to be taken into custody?
I don't know how many arrests there have been. There probably have been some. I mean, there were some examples of folks that were doing things that would justify an arrest, but the police have to make that call on the situation. There may be some situations where where there's suspicion of behavior and they go through an interview process and they not get arrested. But again, that's just normal protocol for how they'll go through that process. So.
Do you know, is the mayor and the police chief still out here, or have they retreated to a building to watch from afar?
So, the chief of police was in command from the operations center, and I believe he's still there. The mayor was here. Unfortunately, he actually had a flight out of town, so he had actually come back into town in order to participate with NAACP in their event, and then had to immediately depart to go back out. So I think he's gone now. He was here during the original permitted planned event, and you may have seen him up there with NAACP.
Are these state troopers we're hearing flying overhead?
The helicopter is from the state, yes.
Anything else you want people to know?
Hey, our law enforcement exists to keep the public safe, and when we define who is the public, it's both the people that want the opportunity to come and voice their concerns and their opinions and exercise their First Amendment rights, and it's the people around that situation, it's the property owners around that situation. And so what our law enforcement are going to do is protect both groups. And not everybody always recognizes that that's what's happening, but that's exactly what they're doing. And so when you see the way they form up, the tactics they use, the equipment they use, the intent is to protect everybody, both the protesters as well as the public around them. So, okay.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that was City Administrator John Hamilton, who we just heard from. Naja?
Yeah, Sydney, it sounds like based on what the city administrator said that there was a specific protocol in place and it played out just as they had intended it to.
Right. They said that there was basically it's kind of what we saw on Monday night, that same type of protocol where they gave many lawful commands, they gave many warnings, and then, like you said, smoke canisters from there that they started putting out.
Well, Sydney,
Naja,
we are going to check back with you in just a bit, but let's now go to WAAY 31's Will Robinson-Smith.
Well, what's the situation where you are now?
Yeah, that's right. We're here at the intersection. Yeah, Dan and Naja, we're at the intersection of Jefferson and West Side Court, the street right here. You can see there's still quite a sea of law enforcement. Sorry, apologize for profanity, I think you just heard there. But law enforcement, including Alabama State Troopers, Huntsville Police, Madison County Sheriff's Office, still lining the area where the protesters were with just over about, I guess, an hour or so ago, a little bit less maybe at this point. There are no protesters here at this point. Right now, all you're seeing is law enforcement that are making sweeps around the square. There were maybe 6 or 7 Alabama State Troopers that left just behind us where we were on Spring Street and went down Jefferson Street, left at this point. So we're continuing to keep an eye as Huntsville Police and other law enforcement agencies continue to work to clear out whatever is left of the protests here, things like bottles and other debris that may be still on the courthouse square. Dan, Naja?
Will there be any all clear called, or will you know when it's all clear?
We're not. That's a good question. We don't know if they're going to give an audible all clear over their announcement system, as far as letting people around downtown know that these streets are going to be travelable by by non-law enforcement, I should say. Right now, you're just seeing the scene right here, where it's still controlled by. You can see the Madison County Sheriff's Office, their detention facility van going by us right here, and some Huntsville police officers coming this way. So we may need to clear out here in just a second. I'll go ahead and ask them if we're all right to stay here or if we need to move on down the street if our position is okay.
And while you look into that, Will, for those for people who may be joining us now, can you just describe that moment? You were near the crowd when they shot off what appeared to be tear gas. Can you describe those moments? I know you were affected directly by that. Yeah, so Joseph, if you can pan toward, you see where the flagpole is just beyond there, that street corner of Fountain Circle and the West Side Court Street. That's where the tear gas started to be fired in that little intersection. Huntsville police were in a line parallel to where we were right now, and
we saw that first the Madison County Sheriff's Office launched some tear gas along Fountain Circle on the opposite side of the courthouse where we're standing right now, as they started to clear protesters moving toward where you can see in the center of your street, and then eventually down toward the direction where we're standing is sort of the motion in which they were working to clear out the protesters using that tear gas.
Will, any indication that this was going to devolve like this from what you saw at Big Spring Park?
You know, from the perspective of Big Spring Park, it seemed like things were going to be okay. Sorry, there was state troopers lining up behind us.
If you have to move, don't hesitate.
Not entirely sure what they're doing. Yeah, no, we're safe right here. Just trying to keep an eye behind us, make sure everything's okay. But what I was going back to your question, Dan, you know, in Big Spring Park, things seemed, you know, like there was an energy and a passion for change, and that they wanted things to, you know, move forward in a peaceful, orderly way. That was something that was repeated multiple times by various speakers, community organizers, government officials. And as the march started, you know, things seemed like they were moving along in a similar fashion. They were peaceful, there was a lot of animated energy, but at the same time, it didn't seem like things were necessarily going to devolve into what essentially happened later on tonight.
And Will, less than 10 minutes ago, we heard from the city administrator, and he described a set protocol that was set to happen. He said first a warning, a few warnings actually, then followed by smoke, and then the final step was the tear gas that you experienced. Did you hear that protocol?
Yeah, we heard several warnings from Huntsville police saying, you know, the protest is over, the official, you know, protest is over, this is now, you know, unlawful what is happening, you need to clear the area. At least 3 or 4 times we heard from Huntsville police over a loudspeaker that was clear and audible over the sound of the crowd. They started off, pretty much each announcement started with this very loud, high-pitched ringing that was completely inescapable. It sounds like, you know, if like a stereo breaks and it just, you know, starts going, wee, but, you know, imagine obviously much louder than, you know, what my voice can produce. They gave that verbal noise before they gave their audible warning multiple times before protesters, you know, did not heed that warning. You know, they tried the cycle multiple times. Community organizers also going up to protesters, pleading with them, you know, we need to go home. Folks, you know, we saw community activists, people like Council President Devin Keith, who also came out and tried to talk to protesters, encourage them to go home. Protesters did not heed that request for a peaceful retreat before the tear gas canister started flying.
And Will, as far as you were able to tell, these were basically loud and disobedient protesters, but not violent protesters, am I correct?
Yeah, that's right, Dan. We didn't see any violence from our vantage point from the protesters toward police or protesters against other protesters. You know, things stayed very non-physical throughout the time that we've been here in downtown Huntsville. A lot of animated shouts and cheers and jeers and, you know, a whole lot of verbal commotion, but it never came to any kind of physical blows that we saw.
All right, Will Robinson-Smith, great work. We're glad you're safe. Thanks for being with us, and we will check in with you in just a few minutes maybe, but stay with us. Right now, we've got another reporter on standby.
Let's go now to WAAY 31's Stephen Dolcizian live from the scene. Stephen, you've been out there for hours as well. Describe where you're at and what are you seeing?
Yeah, Naja, right now I'm on Spring Street in downtown Huntsville, where Huntsville police officers have blocked off the street. I'm going to step out of the camera so you can see this active scene. At this point in time, there are no visible protesters in the downtown Huntsville area near the Madison County Courthouse. Police officers are spread out all throughout, and again, we're at the intersection of Spring Street and Spraggin Street, close to where Huntsville Utilities is. There are a couple cars that are allowed to come by every so often, but that's about it. No visitors, no people walking, no protesters have been allowed back to this area at this point in time. You are taking a look now. There are some Huntsville police officers that are monitoring the streets, making sure that people are clearing, and there are still some people that are crossing the street a little further down. But at this point in time, Huntsville police officers seem like they are closing off a lot of the streets at this point in time. Huntsville police officers, I can see at this point in time, are in head-to-toe full body gear. I don't believe that they are worried about their safety at this point in time, but they've been suited up for quite a while now. Now, I talked to some protesters actually earlier tonight. They said comparing this to Monday's scene, a lot different. They said Monday there weren't nearly as many people, and there were more bangs, quote unquote. There were more methods possibly even used tonight. We know that there was tear gas, and actually along Clinton Street, we were able to see some protesters light off some fireworks, is what some local Huntsville police officers were telling us about the scene. I mean, I was able to see the fireworks actually for myself. They weren't going too high, but they were in the middle of the street, something a little bit concerning there. I'm told that there were no injuries from that incident at that point in time. But earlier tonight, you heard from the city administrator, John Hamilton. He mentioned that there are potentially some protesters that were injured tonight. Now, we're actually being told to move from officers right now. I'm told Huntsville police officers are actually reopening the roads at this point in time. So we're going to step back here to the sidewalk. As you see, police officers slowly are going to move out of the road and open it back up again to the public.
That's certainly a good sign.
Right now we're moving across the street. Absolutely, Dan. You know, we didn't know exactly how long they were going to close off the street at all, making sure that the scene was cleared of any protesters and safe. Obviously, safety, the most important thing for everybody here. We don't have an estimated time exactly of how long it's going to take to reopen the roads. We also are going to be continuing to follow along what roads are closed. As you see right now, Sprague Street and Spring Street is getting ready to reopen to the public. That's what we're seeing here on this side of the courthouse.
Hey,
we do
Stephen,
have some people walking along the sidewalks here right behind us.
We have some video of when this really started to come to a head, and I wanted to ask you, was there any point at which you felt unsafe, perhaps, or frightened for your life or the safety of others around you?
Sure. Yeah, Dan, I mean, I'll be quite frank with you. When you could see some of the smoke grenades, smoke pellets go through the air, hit the floor, and then create a loud bang, that's when things got a little nerve-wracking. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. It was, at one point, a pretty scary scene. You see people just fleeing and running down and through the streets, screaming, yelling at officers, yelling at other people to get out of the way. One of the things you did see was a lot of people helping others get safe, get to a safer area. And as you guys have known, one of our coworkers, Will Robinson Smith, was actually in one of those situations where he was in the gas at one point. And, you know, when you hear things like that, you know, safety is obviously the first thing that always crosses your mind. We're grateful that, for what we know, everybody is safe at this point in time. But, yeah, I mean, it was a scary scene. And like I said, when I was talking to protesters earlier, they said this scene was a little more extreme, so to say, compared to what they saw on Monday.
And
Guys,
Stephen,
right now, for reporting live in Huntsville, Stephen Dilsizian, WAAY 31 News.
And Stephen, in the video we're looking at right now, we can see those smoke bombs sort of going into the crowds. WAAY 31 Cindy Martin described for us hearing the crowd begin to chant, you know, take it down, referring to the Confederate monument. Was there a time that you felt like it was about to turn volatile between the protesters and the police or law enforcement presence? Can you hear me, Stephen?
I think we've lost our connection with Stephen. But you're looking at video of the moment. It happened just before 8 o'clock, I would say, when the police started launching these tear gas canisters and smoke canisters into the crowd to disperse them. They actually waited for a while for protesters to peacefully disperse, and when they didn't, that's when they set off those canisters to forcibly send them on their way.
And we also heard from the city administrator about 20 minutes ago, and he described the set-in-stone protocol for a situation like this. He said first the crowd was given multiple warnings, and WAAY 31's Will Robinson Smith described a loud siren that went off that the crowd could hear before each of those warnings. And then he said the next phase was deploying sort of a gas into the crowd, or smoke rather, and then the final phase was tear gas. And Will and our other reporters also described that a number of community activists and city leaders also reached out to those protesters asking them to leave. But we want to let you know that this was after hours of peaceful protest at Big Spring Park. We saw just really touching moments of unity among our community. But then after that was over, about 6:30, hundreds of people then marched down to the courthouse or the downtown area and were warned several times to disperse before police implemented their plan.
And when you think about it, police really gave them twice as much time as that permit allowed. The permit was from 5 to 6:30. It didn't happen until about 8 o'clock when finally police had to forcibly disperse the crowd.
And some of our reporters were actually directly affected. Let's go to WAAY 31's Stephen Delcizian. Stephen, what's happening where you're at?
Yeah, Naja, right now my face hurts, my throat hurts. From what we understand, Big Spring Park was gassed, and you can feel the effects right now from here. It's hard to breathe, hard to walk in it. You can definitely feel the effects. We've been told to move and get out of the area. That's what we and our crew are doing right now. As we speak, we're all feeling the absolute effects right now. It just shows you how far away that the gas can actually be felt and impact people as we're trying to move and get out to a safer space where we are no longer feeling the effects. I want to show you a little bit of the scene right now. You have Huntsville police officers absolutely filling the streets in downtown.
So, Stephen, real quick,
It's definitely getting hard to...
Just so we understand what
sit and
happened.
breathe.
So these protesters moved back to Big Spring Park, which is just a block or two off the downtown square, essentially, and then police went after them again in Big Spring Park to disperse them, and that's where the tear gas came from?
Yeah, Dan, that's right. That's from my understanding is that's what happened. There were some protesters that went to a different part of Big Spring Park, and that's where some more tear gas was released. You can definitely feel the effects right now. Dan, we're going to try and get to a different spot and a safer spot right now. We're going to have to let you go. I'm going to send it back to you guys in the studio.
All right. Well, please be safe. You're there. We could see WAAY 31's Megan Reyna, WAAY 31's Brecken Terry, Brittany Collins. A number of our field crew are out there right now, and we're just directly impacted by tear gas in the area. And you could just see the pain in Stephen's face as he continues to cough and find a safe place right now. Very active scene.
Yeah, just quickly to reiterate, if you're just joining us, what started out as a peaceful protest at around 5 o'clock this afternoon at Big Spring Park devolved into essentially chaos in downtown Huntsville at about 8 o'clock this evening, an hour and a half after their permit expired. Police gave multiple verbal warnings for the crowd to disperse. Some of them, I should say, not all of them, some of them refused, and then police eventually started firing off tear gas and smoke bombs and cleared the streets physically with their bodies, moving down the streets with tear gas out ahead of them to clear those streets out. A lot of those, now we're hearing from Stephen Delcizian, a lot of those protesters went to Big Spring Park, back where they started, and police had to disperse them there again. And some of that tear gas has wafted back into downtown and is affecting our crews now.
And I want to add as well that the NAACP organized this event, but they did tell peaceful protesters at Big Spring Park not to do this march. WAAY 31's Will Robinson Smith has been there since the very beginning. Will, we just saw a very dramatic scene with WAAY 31's Stephen Delcizian. What's happening where you're at?
Yeah, so we're just on we're on the north side of the Huntsville Utilities building right now. We were actually coming down Spring Street to rendezvous with some of our crew, get some equipment, and that's when we started to smell it first and then really feel the effects of some of that tear gas wafting over Big Spring Park down our direction. I think for better or for worse, because I was in the cloud of it earlier tonight, the little bit that was just wafting didn't hit me quite as hard as it did some of my colleagues that, for them, this was the first time they were experiencing tear gas this evening. It is not a pleasant sensation. As Stephen was describing, it burns the eyes, the mouth. You feel it tingling on your skin as it is wafting over you. Right now, I'll step out of frame. You can see right now you're taking a look at this is Clinton, I believe, that we're looking at right here, the street along Big Spring Park that divides Big Spring Park east and west. Excuse me, this is Church Street that you're looking at, Church Street, where you can see a group of Alabama state troopers that are gathered and regrouping after a night where things started off peacefully, and then over time, the tensions built, the protesters refused to leave, and the tear gas got deployed, and a lot of people felt firsthand what that experience is like. It is not a sensation that you want to go through.
Have you been able to eyeball any protesters right now? Are they still out there that you can see?
So from our vantage point, we can see both Spraggins and Church Street from here. And from this particular spot, we're in the parking lot normally reserved for Huntsville Utilities employees. Right now, there aren't any employees or protesters here. They've all been pushed pretty much north of our position at this point, somewhere beyond there. We saw a couple of people that were walking out of Big Spring Park that looked like they got some of the remnants of that tear gas like we did. They were rubbing their eyes, they had some water. But as far as any large groups, we haven't seen any groups bigger than maybe 5 or 6 people at this point.
And from your perspective, does it catch you by surprise, or are you caught off guard by how quickly things have escalated within the last 45 minutes?
You know, right before the tear gas started coming out at, when we were up on the square, it seemed like somehow the protesters were refusing to move. The police obviously were holding their ground. No one was really giving any way. And as I mentioned before, the police gave multiple verbal warnings, used that blaring siren, trying to get people to leave. The protesters refused to do so. And so at a certain point, you kind of got the sensation that something had to give at a certain point. And, we were standing beside Huntsville police at one point, maybe 15, 20 minutes before tear gas actually started getting deployed. You saw them take a knee and then put on their gas masks, come back up and take their position. And then they waited. And then there were at least 1 or 2 more verbal warnings giving protesters another chance and another chance to try to leave this moment peacefully, to not have to resort to using tear gas. Again, the protesters didn't give ground and the tear gas came out.
And police did not harass the reporters at all. We've seen some of those examples over the past week or so in other cities, but that did not happen to you.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. Where we were, there were a couple of other news crews that were by us, some photographers as well as news television crews. And, Huntsville Police and the Madison County Sheriff's Office, they were very cordial with us as far as, telling us if we needed to move back a little bit, to give them some space. We kind of got some signals about what was about to happen. I mean, we didn't get a full warning saying, hey, you might want to leave. There's going to be tear gas, lobbed just down the street. But, they didn't fire tear gas directly at us. We saw, I believe it was in Kentucky, where some pepper bullets were fired at a reporter. That wasn't the scene here. We happened to be caught up in it because we were so close to the nexus of everything that was happening. But at no point did it feel like law enforcement was specifically targeting the media.
And will you describe that moment when police got on the knee before they launched that tear gas into the crowd? Can you describe the next moments? Hundreds of people were in that space, so did they all just start running, or describe what happened next?
Well, there was, sorry, we're going to move out of the way. There's a car that's trying to leave their parking space. Understandably, it's been a busy night and, traffic has been kind of locked down, so people are slowly starting to leave the area, so we're just going to give them some space to do so. I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Describe the next moments. You painted the picture for us of police kneeling before they launched that tear gas into the crowd. We know there were hundreds of people there, so what happened next?
Yeah, so when the first canister was launched by the Madison County Sheriff's Office, again, this was on the south side of the courthouse. It was launched onto Fountain Circle, and then the protesters there, they started, running toward our position. We moved toward the wall where the businesses were, and, at first people just started backing up, not really realizing what was happening, and then one bang went off, then another bang went off, and then people started corralling near the intersection of Fountain Circle and West Side Square, and that's when Huntsville Police lobbed one of the tear gas canisters at the protesters. They kicked it back at Huntsville Police. Huntsville Police kicked it back into the crowd, and at that point, then more tear gas started coming out, and when a couple more canisters started lobbing, that's when people really started to move quickly away from Huntsville Police as they started to, slowly advance down West Side Square Street. And, you know, we were kind of caught up in the middle of it because we had law enforcement on our right coming down Fountain Circle. We had Huntsville police moving this way. So we were just trying to figure out where we could go safely. Obviously, our eyes were burning, our throats were burning because we were right in the heart of where the smoke was and the tear gas was coming from. So we just grabbed some water, doused our eyes, you know, asked law enforcement, where can we go that is safe right now? And they directed us down the west side of the courthouse. We rendezvoused with our colleagues there, made sure everyone else was okay. And you know, that was sort of how things proceeded. Huntsville police started, you know, making their way north across the courthouse and, you know, down the street.
It looks like Huntsville police did a pretty efficient job, really, of clearing out downtown. And I don't imagine it took more than 25, 35 minutes to do that, to clear all the streets around downtown.
Yeah, I think they were trying to make a point of things needed to clear out from their perspective, that the rally had been over officially for some time, and they wanted things to clear and you know, some sense of order to be restored to the front of the courthouse, and for protesters to leave as they were being asked to. They didn't move quickly. You know, it was a very slow advance as tear gas, you know, kept moving into the crowd. You know, you saw waves of people. Some people, you know, left immediately at that point. Some people stayed, tried to get some footage on their cell phones, on other cameras. But, you know, the more tear gas they used, people, you know, just realized that there was no staying at that point. Like, everyone had to leave, and especially once police got up to their position, that was pretty much the end of it. But like you said, Dan, it was a long process of, you know, trying to coordinate with all the various agencies to make sure that, you know, there wasn't any type of physical confrontation in the sense that, you know, anyone was punched or kicked in that way, you know, as police moved their way down.
You mentioned physical confrontations. Will, was there any indication that any of these protesters were throwing anything at police? Water bottles or rocks or bricks or anything like that?
No, and as we reported earlier in the week, you know, there were some rocks by the courthouse square. Those have been cleared, so we didn't see any projectiles beyond that one canister of tear gas that a protester, you know, tried to chuck back at law enforcement. We didn't see any bottles or anything like that was, you know, used to try to spark, you know, a confrontation between law enforcement and the protesters here that we saw.
First spoke with you hours ago. You brought us the scene of nearly 1,000 people filling Big Spring Park, standing in solidarity for the killing death of George Floyd. Describe the contrast between the feeling of that event and what you've been experiencing within the last hour or so here at the courthouse.
Well, I mean, as you were asking the question, we just actually saw these two gentlemen you see walking toward that sea of blue lights, you know, just throughout the chant "Black Lives Matter." You know, that was kind of, you know, the sense of solidarity carried from one event to the other. You know, it felt like things really hit a tipping point where the protesters wanted some change. They wanted some tangible thing to happen for them to be able to, I think, take away from this moment. And I think from what I was watching and listening, it seemed like they were unwilling to leave because it felt like they weren't given any ground in that moment. You know, as you can see, law enforcement still out here on Church Street, you know, making their presence known. Dan and Aj, you asked about, you know, an all clear earlier on. We're not sure when. These are Alabama State Troopers vehicles you're seeing here right now. We're not sure when they're going to clear this part of the street. Spraggins behind us is clear of law enforcement, but this is the scene you're seeing right now. But it was really unclear exactly when the shift happened. But, you know, some of my colleagues mentioned, you know, the Confederate statue. That was something that was brought up during the protest and during this, you know, dialogue and conversation down at Big Spring Park. You know, wanting to see some reform, talking about voting, being active in this moment. You know, when we were up on the square, they mentioned, or they called for Huntsville police, you know, take a knee, take a knee was something that was repeated multiple times in various chants throughout the evening, and neither the Madison County Sheriff's Office nor Huntsville Police that we saw, ever took a knee, and that was something that I think, may have helped to quell some of the protesters, maybe with some small gesture that they wanted to see. It seemed very unlikely that anything was going to happen with the Confederate statue tonight. We saw the monument in Birmingham that was dismantled. I know that is a hope for a number of people here in Huntsville and Madison County. Again, that was talked about at some length, as my colleagues have mentioned. It's unclear exactly what the future of that Confederate monument will be, but I think that's something that the protesters here tonight and the ones watching from home are going to keep an eye on closely.
We noticed children in the crowd, especially early on in this protest at Big Spring Park. Some of the parents saying, well, this was important for us to bring our children down here to show what civil disobedience essentially looks like in the proper perspective. Hopefully all those children left before it really got dangerous. Was that the case? Did you notice any kids in the crowd?
Dan, I sincerely hope that the children had gone by that point. From what we could see, we could really just see the front line of the protesters, from our vantage point up at the courthouse corner. And from that perspective, it didn't seem like there were many children. I think I saw maybe a couple down the street on Fountain Circle, kind of toward Big Spring Park. But, from what we could see, there weren't a lot of children up front. And so, I think the hope is that some of the parents may have taken them away from the protest at that point once they saw that things were going to stand off until who knows when. But, we didn't see a lot of children up front.
Essentially what we've been seeing in cities all around the country is the protests are peaceful up to a point where the sun starts to set, and as it gets darker, people seem to be emboldened maybe more by the darkness, and that's when things start to get dangerous.
Yeah, I think just tensions were, it was a hot day. It was very humid after some of the rainstorms, and so I think potentially that the heat added some elements of, people's feelings and of this moment. It literally just reached not exactly a boiling point, because the protesters didn't try to advance on police in any kind of hostile way, but they clearly were not ready to back down until the tear gas started coming.
And well, when we spoke with you earlier, you described seeing a crowd of nearly 1,000 people at Big Spring Park at the peaceful protest organized by the NAACP. We've heard some people did disperse at that point. About how many people would you say made the journey to the downtown courthouse?
From where we were up above, it seemed like, we could only see about half of the crowd from our aerial vantage point, but I would say a good majority of them at some point or another made their way to the square that they were, marching around that part of the courthouse. It seemed like there was a lot of translation from down in the park, up the stairs or around the corner up into the courthouse square. There seemed to be a lot of people that, they were here to listen to the speakers. They were here to have their signs, help be a part of the message, show their solidarity, but they also wanted to march, and they also wanted to be a part of that part of the protest. I think that was, something that a lot of people, wanted to make a point to not leave, especially, seeing how many people turned out on Monday night. I talked with a number of protesters who were saying, they were there Monday night. It was important for them to be back tonight, and they were happy to see how many more people there were who had come out, to make their voices heard as part of tonight. Obviously, no one necessarily wants the way this ended with tear gas and people being, forced back because their eyes are burning. But I think a lot of people, wanted to be a part of this moment, and that included marching from Big Spring Park up to the courthouse square.
And Will, you mentioned that you actually saw community activists and city leaders reaching out to the protesters and asking them to disperse.
Yeah, they along with police, they really tried to, they made sure that people who were, trying to come a little bit closer to police, they were keeping their distance. You know, there was both community activists, there was some private security that we saw, as well as uniformed law enforcement officers. And, you know, the activists, you know, and some of the organizers, I think, of the event were really trying to keep folks on the message that this started with, that this was a moment of solidarity with those in Minneapolis and around the country who are protesting the killing of George Floyd, who are justifiably angry about what happened to him, as well as a whole host of other issues for the black community. And, you know, they just wanted to be a part of this moment here tonight.
You mentioned in one of your emails back to the station earlier today, Devin Keith's impassioned speech, you called it, to the protesters. Those are the pictures we showed earlier with everybody with their fists in the air. Can you describe what he was saying at that time?
Yeah, so when Devin Keith came, you know, out to the podium, he wasn't actually one of the people who was listed on the roster of scheduled speakers. And, you know, he made a point to say, well, he asked for everyone to raise a fist. And at that point, the crowd was pretty quiet. It was almost silent as he was speaking, as they were listening to him. And he said, this fist represents not just you, this represents the community. You know, this represents mothers and fathers, you know, people that are your neighbors and the entire Huntsville community. This fist is powerful, and you need to understand what this represents. It was a call to calm protests, and I think, you know, Councilman Devin Keith was trying in that moment, as many other speakers were as well, to really hopefully instill a sense of calm amid the protests, understanding that there is, you know, an anger that a lot of people are feeling right now, but to know that, to look around and see that there was a collective, that everyone that was down there was all unified in raising a fist, or they had their signs up, and to say there are things that we can do constructively together, that this is all part of our community. And, you know, it from above, seeing the wide number of people that were in that moment, it, you know, felt like that was a moment that really resonated with all the people that were listening. As I mentioned, it was, you know, not exactly completely silent, but darn near close.
And well, we've talked a lot on a personal level, as well as a journalist and as a person, about all the things happening across the United States with the killing death of George Floyd. Was there a moment or a takeaway that sort of is imprinted in you that you'll never forget from today?
I mean, I think Devin Keith's speech was definitely a moment. A lot of the speakers, you know, hit on various points of why folks came out today. You know, it was some that are frustrated with how the government is run, state, local, federal. Others that are, you know, just furious at what happened to George Floyd. And, you know, it was just in those moments of silence when, you know, everyone collectively was listening. Because, I mean, there were a lot of moments where people cheered together, where they chanted, Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot, no justice, no peace, things that we've heard echo. I think for me, the moment that I really just, it stands out was just when things were just silent, when people were listening to each other. That was just a moment where, you know, there's so much energy happening right now, you know, for a lot of us, and just hearing that stillness that people were taking in what was happening at that moment was, I think that was the point for me. That was the most powerful.
Yeah, it was truly impactful to see nearly 1,000 people gathered in silence with their arms raised. Something else I noticed, Will, was the diversity of the crowd, the people who came out. It wasn't just all African Americans. It was a very diverse crowd, people expressing their just concern with what's happening right now.
Well, that's exactly right. The crowd could not have been farther from monolithic. It was black, white, Hispanic, Latinx. I imagine some Native American folks in there as well. Just a whole swath of people of various ages and backgrounds that were, all feeling just the overwhelmingness of the moment and the sense that I think that unity can bring, and a lot of people just wanted to be a part of that. As we saw the protests start, with the first one on Saturday, and then we saw, some on Sunday in Decatur and in Athens, in Florence, and in Fort Payne, continuing on to Monday. As I've been, watching these protests and helping with our coverage, the crowds keep growing, the fervor keeps growing, and people keep getting, I think, more invested in what's happening, in their community. And I think the community organizers, the ones speaking tonight, and certainly I talked to one of the activists afterward, she was telling me that, she hopes that tonight is not just a moment of, energy that is encapsulated just in this single space, in this single moment in time, that this carries forward, that people understand why they came out, what this energy is like, and that they continue to work to bring about the change that a lot of them say that they really want. And if they want things to be different for their lives, this activist said, you need to register to vote, you need to be involved in your community, talk with your neighbors. It's a time old expression, but treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself, and just be a part of the change you want to see.
Well said. Will Robinson Smith, thank you very much for that analysis and your personal introspection on the events tonight. We hope people remember how this started rather than how it ended.
Here's hoping. Thanks, Dan, Nadja.
We want to go now to WAAY 31's Stephen Dolcizian. Stephen, last time that we spoke with you about 20 minutes ago, a very serious situation. Another group of our reporters hit with tear gas. Where are you at right now, and what's going on where you are?
Yeah, Naja, right now we're on the intersection of Sprague Street and Spring Street, and like you said, last time we spoke, it was a different story. Right now, I can happily report that our entire team is okay. We're all safe. The effects of the tear gas have worn off on all of us, but just to describe it, your face burns, your nose burns, there's a taste inside of your mouth. It's a unique kind of experience, but I want to show you the scene right now. Right now, last time we talked, I mentioned that Huntsville police officers were going to reopen the streets, especially this portion of the street in downtown Huntsville, Spring Street and Sprague Street. Well, there's a little bit of a caveat to it from what I've noticed, at least right now. Cars and people are allowed to drive away from the courthouse. That portion of the road is open, but if you want to drive in toward the courthouse, that's still closed temporarily. We don't know how long that's actually going to be the case. Huntsville police officers have shown no sign of leaving the scene anytime soon. They seem like they're set on patrolling this area for a set amount of time and possibly throughout the night, as we see a couple of officers scooting up. One actually might be leaving. Actually, excuse me, it looks like both of them are leaving, so this tells me that both sides of the street are about to reopen at this point in time. There are still a couple protesters that have come out to this portion of downtown Huntsville, but nobody is really going towards the courthouse. All of them are still slowly walking away. I want to go behind the camera again and show you a little bit of the scene right now. There's one protester. He's slowly walking actually up the hill towards the intersection, as you see Huntsville police officers slowly starting to drive away. So again, this tells me that now officially the intersection of Sprague Street and Spring Street has reopened to the public as police officers leave the scene. Guys, this is something we've been following all throughout the day, as you know, and slowly it seems like downtown Huntsville is reopening once again. This is a scene that was filled with close to, I would estimate, 1,000 people at one point in time. And many protesters have described to me a difference from today's experience to Monday's experience, saying today was a little more intense, obviously a bigger crowd, and they didn't want to leave the streets. Now, keep in mind that permit was supposed to be from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. And on Monday, with the protest that went on, Huntsville police officers gave about an hour and a half afterwards, allowing people to clear the streets. Well, today, they gave a similar time estimate. A lot of people didn't want to leave the streets, and that's when tear gas methods were used. I'll send it back to you guys in the meantime. Reporting live in Huntsville, Stephen Dolcizian, WAAY 31 News.
And Stephen, can you just describe the moments for people just joining us about 25 minutes ago when you were among a crowd, a WAAY 31 news crew that was actually affected by the tear gas? What happened there?
Yeah, now a group of about 7 of us were actually standing almost exactly where I am right now, the intersection of Spring Street and Sprague Street, as you can hear a couple protesters still out here. And from our understanding, there were protesters that went to Big Spring Park, a section close by of Big Spring Park to where we were standing, and that portion of the park was gassed out. And that gas traveled and funneled towards us where we were all impacted by that gas. And again, just to describe it, it's hard to put into words, but your face burns, your eyes hurt, and you have a taste in your mouth and your throat. It's a scary sensation might not be the right word, but experience. It's something that I personally have never experienced before. I know some of our colleagues even experienced it just minutes earlier. It's definitely something that you'll kind of remember forever.
Stephen, we're very glad that you guys made it out safely. I know it wasn't a pleasant experience at all. Did you hear from anybody else in the crowd about what happened, their reaction to the police reaction?
Yeah, Dan, a little bit. You know, when we were cleared out of the courthouse square, it took a little bit of a while, and the reason being is because when police were using the methods that they were, the tear gas pushing forward, there was a back and forth between protesters and the police, and it wasn't confrontational, but it was a verbal back and forth. Protesters shouting at officers as officers tried to clear them from the streets. Since, there's been a couple protesters here that are just wondering where the next group is. There's some that are not ready to call it a night. They want to continue to protest, as police officers out here are still continuing to kind of close down downtown Huntsville. But that would probably be the interaction that I was able to witness. So some verbal confrontations, if that, but that would pretty much describe the scene that I saw in here.
And Stephen, you, as well with the rest of our crew, have been following this now for hours. You were at Big Spring Park for the peaceful protest, and more than 1,000 people gathered in solidarity for George Floyd. Can you just describe the transition between the energy of what it was like there and then how the evening ended?
Yeah, Naja, when we got here, we got here to a point where the entire lawn of Big Spring Park was completely empty. It was all green. And, you slowly saw as the minutes went by, slowly groups gathered, and then boom, next thing you knew, you could not find an inch of greenery in Big Spring Park. It was just filled with supporters, with protesters. As the day went on, you had NAACP members, you had some local members, you had family members from Dana Fletcher go up to the stand, speak. And the common theme for all of it, there were, I would say, 2 key themes. One of them was thanking everybody for the support, for coming out, and for supporting Black Lives Matter against police brutality. And the second would be the importance to vote, to get out to the polls, especially this November was a big emphasis, and how a vote is another powerful way of speaking. After that, everybody made a movement to the Madison County Courthouse. And it wasn't the typical way to get to the courthouse. It was, there was at one point people were jumping over rocks, hurtling over some ledges to get to the courthouse. It was an unorthodox way, to say the least, to get to the courthouse. Once people got there, it was an interesting scene. People were around. There were some points where people would take a knee in front of law enforcement. There were other times where, in fact, I saw it myself, there was somebody that lit something on fire in the middle of the road. And what kind of caught my eye and what was really interesting about that experience was law enforcement they weren't the ones that went out to get the fire out, so to say. It was other protesters that said, hey, we're not doing this here. And they got the fire out immediately, talked with the protester. I couldn't tell exactly what was caught on fire, but the fire lasted only a couple of seconds. I would say after that, everything really remained peaceful until the curfew was up after 6:30, as we see a couple protesters still slowly making their way home, is only what I can assume. But anyway, after that, you know, it was a scene where people were funneling to the sidewalks, and the big reason why police have been using the tactics that they have been is because people need to get out of the main streets, and there were some people that would not, and that's when they resorted to the methods that they used. Tear gas among some of them. Pepper spray I did see a little bit of. It wasn't directly in somebody's face. It was more as a deterrent, a scare tactic, so I should say. So again, police weren't spraying it directly in somebody's face from what I saw and my experience. And at that point, everybody was just told to leave and evacuate downtown Huntsville, and that's exactly what we did. Guys, back to you.
Stephen, real quick, we're hearing you a little bit better now. We had some interference earlier, but I want you to go over again, if you don't mind. This is the first we'd heard about this fire that was started. Can you describe that one more time? Because we're having a little trouble hearing you.
Sure, Dan, and I hope you guys can hear me a little bit better now. It was on the main entrance side of the Madison County Courthouse. Everybody was standing around the courthouse. Chants were being made, and in the middle of it, there was a little bit of a flare. A fire was started by a protester. I cannot tell you exactly what was caught on fire at that point in time, but it was interesting, like I was mentioning, was law enforcement wasn't the one that stepped in and put out the fire. It was other protesters that came together. They put out the fire, and they said, we're not doing this here, not in Huntsville, not in our city, and that speaks volume to the type of protest that people want to have. They want it to be a peaceful protest. They don't want things to get out of hand. They don't want these type of aggressive tactics to be used. And, you know, unfortunately, there are some people in this case that wanted to go about things a different way. And that's pretty much how that ended. The fire lasted seconds only is what I would describe until it was put out by other protesters. Guys, I'll send it back to you, but for right now, reporting live in Huntsville, Stephen Dilsizian, WAAY 31 News.
Stephen, you referred to the peaceful protest, more than 1,000 people at Big Spring Park. Was there a moment that you will take away or always remember or sort of internalize that you felt was very powerful out there today?
Yeah, Naja, that's an interesting question because I could point to a lot of things, just the entire protest as a whole. But if I was to pick one moment, one experience, it would probably be the moment where everybody was in silence for I want to say maybe a minute, with their fists up, raised up high, supporting Black Lives Matter, fighting against police brutality. And just the sheer silence of that many people is something that will stick with you for a long time. Everybody fighting for the same cause, against the same things. It was a powerful moment to see a community and a county come together. I mean, I've met people that, one guy tells me he's from Chicago. I mean, I met some people that were from more locally outside of Athens and Decatur that came here. They wanted to be a part of this. They wanted to be a part of something where everybody was fighting for the same thing, the right thing. And that's something that will stick with me for forever.
Images were definitely powerful and iconic, and I think all of us will always remember that image of the thousands of people, more than 1,000 people, in that moment of silence with their arms raised. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, and Stephen, you've been a reporter here at WAAY 31 for a number of years now, and you've worked the streets all across North Alabama with law enforcement from all across North Alabama. If you can, give us your sense of what these people do every day and how they treat the community as a whole.
Yeah, Dan, well, I think it varies from the county and the jurisdiction that you're in, but I mean, for the most part, the local officers that we have, it's really hand in hand, and you know, fighting for the same things. You know, I can't speak for everybody, but from the police standpoint, I know that they put their lives on the line every day, trying to make sure that the community is safe here in Huntsville, here throughout Madison County, and the other parts of North Alabama. And at the same time, you know, that's what obviously we try to do here is boots on the ground, giving people a live look at these things and the dangerous situations that people are in. You take that perspective and you bring it to what we've seen tonight. People, I think, acknowledge that police officers were there by their sides. I think that they know that they were there to protect them and to keep them safe while having a peaceful protest. But at the same time, people the aggravation that I've seen is people just want the freedom to continue to protest. And that's obviously something where it's difficult to do when the streets have to be shut down and the permit is expired. Guys, it's been a pleasure kind of describing this situation, but reporting live in Huntsville, Stephen Dilsizian, WAAY 31 News.
Thanks, Stephen. We have plenty of videos and pictures posted online right now at WAAYTV.com.
And stay with us. We have about a 30-minute break, and then we return with WAAY 31 News at 10 o'clock. We have team coverage from everything that happened today.